Hello, welcome to another episode of Tiny Nest. I'm Kiva.
And I'm Jake. This series is following our tiny house project from the early stages through to completion and beyond.
In this episode, we do a few things to prepare for our roofing.
You may have noticed in earlier episodes that we were keeping track of the day of the build, but we've lost track, so we're just going by month now. At the time of posting this video, we're at about 3 months, and most of what you'll see in this video was recorded around 2 months.
You're going to see how we finished our roof ventilation. If you'd like to see how we got started, click here for our roof installation video. And if you want to go back and see our initial plan for the roof ventilation, click here for our structural video.
We've begun sheathing the roof with the same 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood that we used for the subfloor. And as an added measure to make sure that we maintain that air gap that we took so much care to create in the first place, we're slapping some scraps of 3/4 inch plywood on the underside of the pieces of sheathing so that they land in between the rafters, so that if we were to accidentally push the insulation up from below, there's something to prevent it from completely closing off that air gap. If you notice these and were wondering what they are, they're just some padding for our tarp so that it doesn't get ripped on the sharp corners. We've completed most of the system to allow the venting underneath of the roof sheathing. You saw how we left a gap on top of the insulation. Then we put some little blocks on the underside of the roof sheathing boards to make sure that gap can't get accidentally closed. Then we installed a fine mesh to act as a bug screen so that that cavity can't get infested by anything. And now we're just putting these little blocks to stand the final finished fascia board off of this rough sub-fascia board, providing that an air gap for the air to enter, pass through the bug screen, travel underneath the board the full length of the roof, and then out the other side.
We're in a bit of a rush to get the roof on, so we're just kind of plowing ahead. As you can see, we've got the house wrap on. Found that to be pretty challenging, especially with the wind. Managed to get it pretty much wrinkle-free, but it's not perfect in some places. We managed to get one unbroken wrap around the house using the full 9 feet, and then we just cut strips to fill in the space at the top, making sure to overlap 6 inches and taping any seam with contractor's tape. Because it's so windy where we live, we decided to go with the plastic cap nails instead of the staples to hold down the house wrap. The nails are less likely to tear if the wind catches it. We couldn't find any short plastic cap nails, so we ended up buying 2-inch long ones and then just cutting them down so that they wouldn't poke really far through the sheathing.
We also made sure not to put any fasteners too close to a window opening, especially on the top where we'll need to lift a flap of the house wrap up during the installation of a window. We're kind of doing a couple things at once here to get to a point where we can put the roof on. The fascia board needs to go on, but before that, we need to put the bug screen at the top of the rain screen. So we've got a couple rain screen strips started here. We're using this fine mesh as a bug screen, and we're just slipping it in behind the rain screen and then folding it down over top to create a barrier when the siding is on. So you can see what we're doing here. We slid it in behind, like I said, and then fold it over in front, staple it down. And you can see that when the siding goes on, it'll make contact with the front and the cavities opening at the top will be completely blocked off. We've been working on test fitting the fascia boards, and we've reached a point where we're ready to take them off, stain them, and then put them back on as a finished installation. It proved to be one of the more challenging tasks, as there's a lot of angles that we had to mate. It was really helpful to look at the model and see how everything fits perfectly together, and we figured out the angles that we had to run the boards through on the table saw to get that to work. But of course, in the real world, things aren't quite as perfect as they are in the model, so there was a lot of finicking and a few curse words to make things fit right. But we're at a point now where we can fill in the gaps with some caulking and hopefully kind of hide the remaining imperfections, and it'll be good enough to carry on. When we test fit the fascia boards, we realized that we'd left a bit too much of the roof sheathing overhanging, so it's sticking out past the front surface of the fascia board. And there's a piece of roofing called the eave flashing that's supposed to sit tightly against the top of the roof sheathing and then curve down in front of the fascia board. And the way this is will cause that piece to not sit nicely. So even though I've already got this bug screen installed, I'm gonna go ahead and use a skill saw and slice all of this excess roof sheathing off so that we have a nice plane for the eave flashing to sit against.
So we got our siding in the last shipment. It's just stacked behind me here. And what we did is we cut a piece off and took it in to get some paint samples put on. We're trying to match the color as close as we can to the one that's in the model, like our little image. So we went with this one here, and the fascia board has to go on before we put the metal roofing on, so we just stained some of that last night.
We've installed the stained fascia, and we happened to find a sealant that color matched it almost perfectly, so we've used that to fill in some of the seams where they meet. And in addition to that, I went through and very carefully pre-drilled some holes and used some very small stainless steel screws to suck together some spots where it was still separated a bit, squishing the sealant in between, cleaning it up, and making a pretty good finish out of it. Another small detail about how we installed the fascia boards is that on the front and the back side of the house, we needed two boards. So rather than just butting them together like this where they meet, we made angled cuts and fit them together like this. The benefit of doing this is that if they were just butted together and the board shrank or shifted in some way and separated, you get an ugly gap. But since every surface of the board has been stained the same color, when they're fit like this with the angled cuts, if they were to separate, you'd still see the inner surface, which is the same color, and it would be much less noticeable. We also made sure to orient the angle of the cut such that wind forces from towing the trailer would tend to shed off of the angle instead of catching and pulling it.
If you want to see some of our previous videos, click on the preview tiles, and subscribe if you want to follow our progress. You need to do that again. I wasn't ready for it and I laughed really sick.